Good morning, everyone. For once this morning, I'm going to be speaking, not my husband, because today is a special day. It's Mother's Day, and Janice asked me if I could share what I've learned as a mother over the last year. And at the beginning, I was wondering what I could say or offer to you, because it's not even been a year and a half that I've been a mother. I wondered why she asked me and not someone else who had more experience. But rather quickly, after thinking about it, I found things that I had learned this year. Things about God, about me, about my husband, and my little girl. That's what I want to share with you this morning. The first thing I want to share with you is something rather frightening. We'd been home 2 days from the hospital with our daughter, and it was at night and I couldn't sleep, so I got up and went down the living room. And I was kind of hit by the responsibility of being a mother. I wondered how I was going to be able to sleep enough, take care of her. And I was also afraid that something would happen to her and she would die. And I realized that I had no control over her little heart or her breathing. And it really wasn't easy. It was really worrying me. I had no control over her life. And I was thinking about the sudden infant death syndrome, and I was quite worried. I was also exhausted because of the birth. It hadn't been easy, but in spite of everything, we saw that God acted. He took care of us during this time at the hospital. I started talking to God about what I was feeling, and quite quickly, God just told me to give her over to Him. He's told me that He was watching over her and He was going to really take care of her. I started feeling very peaceful, and I didn't have those kind of thoughts that ever came again. I knew God was going to take care of her and her life, and that nothing depended on me. So the first lesson I could say as a mother was really to let go of my daughter's life, over which I actually had no control anyway, and give it to God. What I'd say to myself today is that God watches over our children. No matter what happens, He can take care of them better than we can. Then I learned something about patience. I realized that patience is really important with my daughter and with children in general. I'm sure you have experienced it also. I have surprised myself sometimes to see how much patience I had for my daughter, and even more than I even imagined. When she eats, it's not perfect. She takes her spoon, she puts some all over, she puts her food on the floor, and I usually like the house to be nice and clean, but with Annabelle, I have patience for her. Or other times, sometimes to keep her busy, I'll open a drawer in the kitchen so that she can play while I'm cooking. And she puts everything on the floor. She plays a drum with a measuring cup on a chopping board, but that's okay. And at the end, well, there's utensils all over the kitchen. But the more I went through things like that, I realized that I have patience. Okay, let's just let her go. The house doesn't have to be perfect all the time. What I realized today about that is that if I realize that if I have patience with my daughter when she's learning something like eating or using objects or playing, I tell myself, well, God is much better than I am with patience. He doesn't expect us to have everything right the first time, even if our lives are sometimes look like a kitchen drawer that's all over the floor. In spite of everything, he's patient and he lets us learn at our own speed. It also showed me that I don't have to be as demanding with myself in my own life, because God is not demanding with me. I was also surprised by how my body was able to wake up several times a night. I could still sleep well. I could fall asleep quickly. You have to understand that for me, sleeping is very important. I've always liked sleeping late, and when I'm tired, I don't have as much patience. I get anxious with the really frightening thoughts. So before I had children, I was very careful to have 9 hours of sleep a night. On the weekends, I could sleep in till noon. So you can imagine, I was really worried about getting enough sleep, because I knew it would all change. I was afraid of having a depression, because I said I would have all these frightening thoughts. What am I going to do? It wasn't easy. But today I see that God really was graceful to me. I was able to adapt without difficulty. We had a good baby. I know that even when she was little, it was even easier, because even if she woke up several times in the night, in the morning, we could sleep in together. And so we could sleep late. I also have a husband who was very present. He would wake up several times in the night. He was always involved with our daughter. So I never felt like I was alone to handle everything. And I saw in that God knew what I needed. He had already prepared everything in front of me. That's so that I don't fall down, so that I'm not invaded by bad thoughts, sad or whatever. And I realize that I can trust God, that He's not going to take me past my limits, that He controls everything. Finally, what I also discovered this year is that I like to be a mother. I had never really felt the need to be mother. I know I had friends who really wanted to be mothers. They knew the names of their children, but I never experienced that. I didn't necessarily not want to have some, but it was never part of something that I really wanted. I never really liked babies. I thought they were fragile. I prefer older children that I can interact with, but not babies. And I remember that with my husband, we really took a step of faith, and we were canoeing in a lake near our house in Sherbrooke, and we were thinking about having children, and we said in the Bible, children are considered to be blessings. And so we decided to go ahead with that step of faith. And I always felt at peace with the idea of being a mother, and that God would provide. And I remember I was still kind of afraid, and I said, how am I going to love this baby with who I can't really interact with? And I remember I spoke to my sister-in-law, Becca, and she told me that it's something that's natural, that it happens by itself. And I was happy to hear that, because especially from her, because I know that sometimes we're kind of alike, and I was glad, and I was able to give this fear over to God and to trust Him. And thanks to what my sister-in-law said, I said, okay, Lord, I can trust you. You created me like this, and you're the one who created to have me to have Annabelle. And so I went forward with that. I also remember another friend that I really love, also, who unfortunately has moved to the States. But one day she said to me that we have the children that we need, and we are the children, the parents that our children need. And that also remained with me. And thinking over this last year, I really like to be a mother, to be with my baby every day, to feed her, have naps with her. I see how fast she grows up. The more she older she gets, the more I love her. It's really special. The see my love grow for her each day. I'm still not a great fan of newborn babies, but it's okay. I still have developed a sensitivity for little children. I remember one time that I saw a film with a whole bunch of babies that were crying, and that really affected me. It just shows that God is able to change our hearts and our desires. He created us with a capacity to adapt through His grace. This year with Annabelle, it really went by quickly. I saw that it was a privilege to be her mom. And I'm anxious to see the lessons in the next year that God is going to teach me again. That's the 4 things that I wanted to share with you this morning. I also wanted to give a word to mothers, but also for all women, that we could grow in Him, that we can keep our eyes and thoughts fixed on Jesus every day. And above all, my prayer is that we can point our children toward Jesus, and that they would also see in us how it's good to be submitted to God and to trust in Him and to give Him the control of our lives and to trust Him. I wish you to have a beautiful Sunday. May God bless you. Good morning. For this day, Mother's Day, I'd like to tell you some lessons that I've learned from my children. 5 years ago, Jeff did a series on lessons I learned from my mother and lessons I learned from my father, and I decided to return the favor. One of the first things I learned was that 3 small boys can make a very huge mess in just minutes with a soup spoon and water from a dehumidifier. More water, Danielle, is never good to hear. The mastermind of the project, Nick, had decided that the back door window was dirty and needed to be washed, and the water they found was in the dehumidifier at the other end of the basement. I can tell you that it took us a long time to clean up that mess. Seriously, though, the first lesson that I learned was the total depravity of the human heart. Jeremiah 17:9 tells us, "The human heart is the most deceitful of all things and desperately wicked. Who really knows how bad it is?" Then Matthew 15:18 and 19 says, "But the words you speak come from the heart. That's what defiles you. From the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, all sexual immorality, theft, lying, and slander." You know, some experts say children are born a blank slate, and society messes them up, such as John Locke in the 17th century. Then, today, René Baillargeon, who has a PhD, says studying babies is pure in a way.
It can tell us how our social and moral processes develop before they're muddied up by culture or language or complex reasoning. In other words, babies are pure, but they get messed up as they grow up. However, the first time that I noticed the depravity of human heart was when Nick was 10 days old. We were on a trip home from Pennsylvania, and he was hungry. Of course, back then we didn't have car seats, no of those kinds of laws, and so I was going to feed him on the way in the car. It took a little longer to get all set up than he expected, and he got very angry with me. And for a while he even refused to drink because he was so mad. Where did that anger come from? In 10 days, society had not had time to mess him up. Obviously, it was his sinful nature that he was born with. I can remember one time when one of my daughters called. She was crying, and I said, "Now, what's the matter?" And she said, "My daughter lied." Now, the baby was about 2.5 or 3, very young. And the first time my daughter realized that her daughter was a sinner, very interesting turning point in her life, because before that, and I've noticed this in a lot of parents, you have a tendency, if you're not true students of your child, you have a tendency to make excuses. Well, they're tired. Oh, they didn't understand. But that time she realized that it was just the rebellion in her heart. Now, if you've ever watched children, especially children of other people, not your own, because we don't see it as well in our own kids, you soon realize that kids know exactly what buttons to push to get their parents to give them what they want. And also, in a power struggle, to get their parents really going. I used to joke and say that kids have a PhD in psychology from birth. They eventually lose it, but tiny little ones, less than a year old, know exactly what to do and how to act to get what they want from their parents. The second thing that I learned is that discipline is not easy, but it's worth it. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Direct your children onto the right path, and when they're older, they will not leave it." Now, this is not a promise. This is a principle. I mean, just look at the very first children, Adam and Eve. They had a perfect parent, and yet they made the wrong decision. Our job as parents is to make the children aware of the depravity of their heart and their need of a Savior. Our job is not to change their behavior. Because, yes, you can change behavior of a person. You can, Pavlov, change the behavior of dogs. But that doesn't change their heart, and that doesn't show them that their need of a Savior. I have a good illustration of this. There was a little girl who was in church, and she was standing up, and her father told her to sit down. Now, she didn't want to sit down. She wanted to stand up. And after talking a little bit with her and threatening her, the little girl finally sat down, crossed her arms, and said to her father, "I might be sitting down on the outside, but I'm still standing up in the inside." You can change behavior, but the true goal is to have the child's heart changed. Our job is to make them realize the need to change their heart, and then to point them to the one who can. We also need to teach them to submit to authority. The ultimate authority is the Lord, but the reason we have children with us for about 18 years is because that's about how long it takes to teach them what we need to teach them, including submitting to authority. The child needs to learn to submit to your authority because as he gets older, or she, they're going to have to submit to the authority of their school, at their job, and of course, we want them to submit to the Lord also. Second and subsequent children make your job a lot harder. When you have one kid, there's a ratio in most families of 2 adults to 1 child, and it's not too bad. But once you get the second child, it makes your job much harder because, first of all, there's interpersonal conflicts. Those kids fight, they argue. And our job is to have them learn to work through conflicts, how to work through conflicts, not just the parents deciding who gets the toy or who gets the first candy. They need to learn how to solve conflicts. This also, just as an aside, as parents, the children will see how the mother and father work through their conflicts. You know, arguing in front of kids is never good. But when the kids see that there's a conflict, they also watch how you work through it. And this is can be a really good model for the children to see how to work in a biblical way through an interpersonal conflict. The more kids there are, the more that it helps children to prepare to get along with anyone. We had 7 children. Every one of them was different. I think we pretty much have the range of personalities in our family. And each of them got to learn how to get along with other personalities. Another thing we need to teach them is how to overcome selfishness. Now, I hate to burst your bubble, but every child is born selfish. And if that is not taught as they're young, how to get over the selfishness, it makes very selfish adults. Philippians 2, 3, and 4 tells us, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. As parents, this is an important thing to teach and to model. And the last lesson that I'm going to talk about today is I learned the state of my sanctification, or how Christ-like I am. Before you have kids, it's easy to think you're pretty Christ-like. You know, you have control of your life. It's okay. You have your job. You come home. If you're married, you have your spouse. But then you get kids. These kids are dependent on you 24/7. I remember one time when one of my daughters said to me, you know, I wish that somebody would have told me that once I have kids, there's going to be someone dependent on me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I never get a break. I told her I was sorry that I thought she realized that from watching us, but anyway, she's a really good mom, by the way. But then you get sleep deprived, stressed, frustrated, and boom. Then your sanctification, your self-control is sorely put to the test. I remember one time when I was working in the kitchen. The bedrooms are upstairs in our house. And I realized I was hearing the toilet flushing a few times. And then there was a horrible scream. Now, as a parent, you learn when children are very young, you've learned to distinguish between the cries. You know, the cry of, I'm cranky, or I'm hungry, or I'm tired, or, oh my goodness, I'm in terrible pain. And you learn to react quicker to those cries. You also can tell in a scream, when they're screaming mommy, you can tell the urgency of the matter. Well, I realized that this was a very urgent scream, and I went running upstairs. And as I turned the corner onto the second set of steps, I was greeted by Niagara Falls of toilet water and toilet things coming down the steps. Now, I have to admit that at that point, I lost it. I unkindly asked my children how many times they thought that they were going to flush the toilet before they realized that it wasn't helping. Then there was also another time when the kids had been painting the fence outside, actually with stain. Now they say that stain is water soluble. I had begged to differ. But anyway, the can of paint was put away improperly in the shed. And Sabby was out there getting something, and it fell on her. Now you can imagine, she's about 6 years old, covered head to toe in paint. What's the first thing she does? She runs into the house, screaming. Till I got to the back door, she had gotten pretty far in the house with her paint-filled shoes. You could see where she had run in from the shed. And then the next thing I saw was Jeff, who had come to investigate the problem, had walked through the paint on the floor. He says he remembers how squishy it felt. And he came running in the house. So I have, at that point, 4 other children who were old enough to walk, who were investigating the problem also. I have one kid who's screaming because she's covered in paint. I have another kid who's not happy because he stepped in the paint. And I was overwhelmed, let's just say. That's another time I lost it. Fortunately, my husband arrived home from work right at that point, and so he took over the outside problem and keeping the rest of the kids out of the paint, and I took over washing the children who were covered in paint. You have to depend on God for strength and patience to make it. That was one of the big things that I learned, and honestly, I'm still learning. Making it through the day, sometimes just making it through the day with everyone alive, fed, clothed, and the house not burned down is a victory. That often clashed with my orderly view of how things should have been. But Philippians 1:6 says, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. That's such a good promise. We're just works in progress, people. And we will be progressing until the day God takes us home. Happy Mother's Day.